I don't believe in ghosts. I've never been one of those otherworld groupies, exchanging spooky stories in the pub, rolling their eyes and letting their talk trail into the unknown. Not that I think science has all the solutions. When things happen that I don't understand, I don't have any easy answers. Restless spirits? Alien visitations? A chemical imbalance in the brain? It doesn't really make much difference, except that it's easier to believe that the truth is out there than accept that it's
right here at number 3 Rosalind Close. My brother Richard is making cheese on toast, and I'm trying to stop my hands from shaking.
Richard thinks it's my migraines. I think it's the house. Don't ask me why. As I've said, I've got no answers, but there's no denying it only really started when I was helping him move in. I probably overdid it. Straining at crates, lugging wardrobes. You're such a cheapskate, I told him. Why don't you pay the removal men to do this? He said I needn't bother to help if I wasn't up to it. That made me work even harder. You'd think I'd have given up trying to impress my brother by now. But I was lifting and shoving and dragging like a lunatic all day. Late in the afternoon, I slumped against a box of books, and Richard called a tea break. He'd kept the kettle and the mugs out, but the idiot hadn't got milk or tea. So off he went in search of the local shops, and I leant against the banisters and wallowed in the ache of my arms and neck. The house didn't need redecorating. That was a big plus. It probably tipped the scales for Richard. I'd envisaged him buying a Victorian terrace or original features and all that. But now that he was alone, I suppose he couldn't face choosing colours and washing down walls. So he opted for this cul-de-sac of pebble-dash semis instead. I levered myself to my feet and wandered into the reception room, one long, light space running from front lawn to back lawn. Any passers-by could see straight through. I stood at the window and considered the garden. Straight lines, blank geometric borders, fine for Richard. I couldn't see him fussing among the petunias. Across the road, a concrete lamppost had already fizzled into life. It reminded me of interminable Sundays in my childhood, cracked pavements, feeble knots of litter in the guttering, yawning aeroplane, platinum sky. Something moved at the lower corner of my vision. A dip, a swoop, a dark blotch. I couldn't quite tell. My dismal eyesight is peppered with specks and lights. Apparently it's quite common with myopia. I used to be desperately envious of Richard's 20/20 vision. I still wonder what it's like to have such an open, untampered view of the world. I returned to the box of books and took a few out. Guide to the World's Markets, Simple Statistics, Short History of Britain. I opened one and started to read the introduction. In traditional terms, any constitutional history of Britain I chased the words, but their meanings skipped away. Some connection broke between the page and my mind. I tried again. This confusion was familiar. At the very centre of my eyes, an invisible, unsteady pulse was swelling. It expanded into a jagged wave of light. Migraine. First one in years. I replaced the book and prepared to sit it out. They don't usually last long. The circle of light grows wider and peters out. Then there's a leaden headache for about an hour. But this wasn't the usual kind. As the ripples reached the boundaries of my vision, something else began. A pulling sensation, a magnet sucking at my skull. And a noise deep inside my head, a mumbling, intimate voice. Syllables without words, like a badly tuned radio. I started to panic. That's the way I am. Richard calls me heebie-jeebie, says I get into a state about the slightest thing. As a child, I worried myself into asthma attacks. When we went swimming, I fretted that Richard would knock himself out on the floor of the pool. Sitting there on the edge of the shallow end, I pictured the blood unfurling to the surface and began to hyperventilate. Poor Richard had to leave his sneering friends and calm me down. And where the hell was Richard? I got up and went to open the back window, just to clear my head. My reflection came to meet me in the glass. Then, I don't know what it was. Something distracted me, made me stop in my tracks. My reflection kept walking. Framed by the last wavering remnants of my migraine, my detached reflection approached. My face, its face, was changing. The features grew vaguer. I felt a catch of recognition, but it wasn't me. When Richard came back, I was cowering in the hall. "I'm ill," I whimpered. "I'm going mad." He told me not to be ridiculous. He said I was just exhausted. I said, "Where did you go? Why did you take so long?" He put his arm round me, talking steadily. He said I was stressed out, needed a rest. He soothed away my fear.
After tea, I felt better. I started filling the bookshelves while Richard steered the furniture around upstairs. There was one awkward moment when I came across a book his wife, Susan, had given him. A Lover's Discourse. Not his kind of book at all. But then Susan wasn't really his kind of person. Very friendly, very sweet, but I don't know. I wasn't surprised when it all fell apart. She'd written a verse on the title page. In your shadow, in the light of your eyes, in the thought you nearly grasp, in the life between dream and day, I will always be with you. She was given to that sort of thing. I smirked, imagining Richard's embarrassment. Should I put the book in full view on the shelf, or tuck it away discreetly? Richard never said much about their breakup, but he was still reeling in his own contained way. The day she walked out, he was at my bedsit. He'd come to see me. I was quite low at the time. Pressure at work, no one to share the load. I remember him sitting on my bed, trying to listen, grunting at the ends of my sentences. He stared at his knees, and that little muscle in the side of his face was working. He'd left her there packing her stuff. Couldn't watch her go, I suppose. I said to him, "At least it's a clean break, Richard. You can put it all behind you now." And he looked up at me like a wounded animal. That's what she'd done to him. But there you are. You can't judge, can you? I slipped the book behind a row of hardbacks. It was pretty late when we finished. Richard said I may as well stay the night and made up a bed for me in the spare room.
I wasn't wearing my contact lenses, but as I padded down the kitchen, I could just make out the bright, blurred form moving in the glass towards me. Richard was at work the following day, but I offered to stay and get on with things. I'd taken a week off to help. Any excuse to get out of that office, really, with its whispering girl women, sparkly with rings and makeup. I should hand in my notice, but it's convenient and close. I felt fine, unwrapping plates and plugging in lamps. It was good to see the house taking shape in daylight, safe and factual. I worked for hours. I should have stopped for lunch, but I wanted to surprise him by getting the downstairs all sorted out. The street lamps came on. I knew I was flagging. My vision was tugging again, slipping out of focus every now and then. I sat on the floor and shut my eyes for a while. I don't know how long I was there. Eventually I decided to stir myself, but I couldn't. Tiny, cold pinpricks stuttered along my flesh. To my left was the window. If I opened my eyes, I knew I'd see her again, turning and swaying in the yellow light. The phone. It wasn't Richard. Number unknown. A woman's voice said his name. Susan. "He's out," I said. I was flustered. There was a short silence, and then she said,
"Oh, Rachel, is that you? Guarding the fort, are you?"
She asked when Richard would be back, and her voice weakened.
"Look, tell him I called. If he ever wants to talk to me."
I ended the call. I pitied her in a way, but there was something wrong about this. A faint tremor of anxiety that I couldn't quite place. It occurred to me that I should have asked her where she was. As far as Richard was concerned, she'd vanished into thin air. He still torments himself about it. I've heard him shifting and sighing in his bed. I've told him, give it time. Everything passes in time. Bloody Susan. Her snaking voice wound itself into my head and squeezed my thoughts. I never really trusted her. Behind all that sweetness there was, I don't know, something devious, destructive. Richard was besotted from the first, of course. Well, I can understand that. The almond eyes, the long red hair, the lulling, cooing words. I sat on the sofa and tried to concentrate. All I need to do, I kept telling myself, is to tidy up, make some tea, and be relaxed and cheerful when Richard gets home. I focused on my breathing, slowing it down. That noise, that mumbling, bubbled through my efforts. I suppose I felt guilty. There's no getting round it. I should have told Richard. I should have told him that Susan had come back. It was only a week after she left him. She hadn't expected me to be there, in their house. She let herself in, still had her key, and stood there in the hall, scanning the pale squares and rectangles where I'd taken down the pictures. She looked me up and down. I was wearing Richard's sweatshirt to keep the dust off and holding some of the nails I'd prized out of the walls. It must have been a shock. She'd only been gone a matter of days, and here I was, dismantling her home. She said,
Oh, Rachel. So you're guarding the fort, are you? Look, tell him I called round. If he ever wants to talk to me...
That smooth voice, that soft red hair. After clearing up, I took the mirror to a skip down the road. I don't think Richard ever missed it. Well, this looks better. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I hadn't even heard Richard come in. Starting to look pretty homely now, he said. You all right? I smiled. I'll make the tea, I said. I told him I was worn out and wouldn't mind staying another night. I didn't mention anything else. Time enough for that. Gradually, I'm sure Richard will realise his mistake in buying this house. It's not his kind of place. People can see in from all sides. Not ghosts, just people. Once he understands that, we can set about finding somewhere else. Somewhere quiet, where we can be left alone.